Hi, Bob Sandidge. Welcome to Power of Voice, one of my very, very favorite topics. I've been in the media communications business for over 30 years, and so I've spent a lot of time listening to people, paying attention to how people communicate, how people learn, how people understand what's going on around them, and how people really connect up at some very subtle and powerful levels. One instance that I will give you the benefit of my personal research is I was working on a project to do some trade show work, and I paid a lot of attention to things at trade shows. I'll often go to trade shows just to see how people are using media and the colors and displays and graphics and so forth, and what attracts people's attention. But one of the things that I was particularly interested in, because I produce a lot of AV media, was how people were using it in their booths and how effective it was. So at this one show, and this was about the time that video was coming around, so everybody had TV sets and sound and everything in their booths at McCormick Place. So as I was walking around, I was really noticing that, and people were very proud to be having this stuff out there, that people were using loudspeakers and putting a lot of sound into the room in order to attract people's attention over to their booth. And what I noticed was, after observing for a while, is that many people, a majority of people, would be able to listen to that message from a distance and determine if they had an interest or not and move on. Now, of course, the message, they couldn't hear the whole message. It's a very short clip, a little soundbite thing. So they weren't really giving it a fair opportunity to know if they were interested or not. All they heard was this little bit and walked on. And I thought, I don't want that happening to my clients. My clients have a more complicated story. They need to have people's attention. They need to be able to engage people in conversation and make their pitch to people. So how do we do that? How do we get them to stop and come into the booth? Well, one of the things that I drew on was Disney, for one. I've done a lot of work looking at how Disney builds attractions and what's interesting and exciting about them. Also, the Museum of Science and Industry is another fascinating place. Anywhere there are exhibits and you want to observe some people's behavior, you can learn a lot about communication, about what attracts attention and what people love to spend some time with. So anyway, I was at the Museum of Science and Industry, and I was noticing it's a pretty quiet place except for all the people and the activity, and yet there's a lot of media going on. And the way they do it is they have these little, or at least this is what they were doing at that time, they had little surround bars with parts of telephones when they actually had real telephone. This was like a chopped in half telephone, so it just had the ear set part that was on there, and they were on these hooks. And what I noticed there was people would come around to these exhibits, and they were standing in line waiting to put this earphone on and watch this TV presentation of whatever the topic was. And they're standing in line for that, and they would listen to the whole thing for maybe 5 or 6 minutes before moving on to the next one. So it was a way to draw people in, and they really, because they were not talking to a person also, I think that gave them some advantage, because you didn't feel like, oh, somebody's going to come and hit on me and try to sell me something. And, of course, museum was a little bit of a different experience. But I was thinking, hey, this could work in a trade show exhibit. So I did it. In fact, I tracked down the guy who made the telephones up in White Pigeon, Michigan or someplace, and we put together an exhibit. So our client went into McCormick Place, and guess what? People were standing in line listening to our show. And they would spend the whole time, listen to the whole thing. Then if they had more questions or wanted to talk to some people, they were around. But by then, the core of the message had already been communicated to them. And they self-served. They stepped up and they listened, and they spent some time with us, because we didn't scare them away. We didn't make a big noise. We weren't just playing a little clip that they could sample. We weren't doing what everybody else did. Now, to me, I like to observe the world and turn everything into a pattern that may be applicable someplace else. And to me, that particular pattern, I believe, has a lot to do with the way human beings communicate. Because you may have noticed this too, that some people talk really loud, and it's sort of irritating. It's sort of hard to be in the space with them, because they really it's just loud. And it's sort of like that loudspeaker at the trade show is you don't want to be around it. You can hear, you've heard enough, and you walk on. You want to get away from it. So, I think that this is something we want to be aware of in our work environments, is how we are using our volume and how we're using the analogs of our voice. And the analogs are all of the qualities of our voice: loudness, pitch, so forth. to really effectively engage the persons that we're communicating with, and certainly not be off-putting, because our voice is who we are. This is how we are perceived. Much more than anything else we do, our voice is going to be telling people about who we are, what attitude and mood we're in. So, as we communicate with other people, one of the things that we can do is actually, as you get close to people, you can begin to talk a little bit more intimately. And this is almost a natural thing that human beings do when you're having a conversation with somebody and you're standing perhaps and you're getting comfortable with each other, and your voices really tend to move down to a more intimate range, like it's just us in this sphere having this conversation. And in many ways, I think that's the kind of feeling, that rapport, or where you're really kind of connected up to people in a way, or at least you're working toward that connection, where you want to soften your voice and to be more invitational in the way you're using your voice. So you want to invite people to listen to the story. You want to say enough to intrigue them so that they really want to hear the rest of what you have to say. And some of that is thinking about crafting your message, particularly if it's something that you need to tell a lot of people and it is the same message, then you might want to practice a little bit. But even in everyday conversation, just noticing how you use your voice. You can use your voice very emphatically, and sometimes you may get a little bit loud. You may get a little bit, because you've got a lot of energy in it. But a person normally doesn't talk that way all the time. The world is not full of shouting. The world is full of conversation and different levels of talking. So think about that and notice whether you're like doing the earphone thing or you're doing the loudspeaker thing, and begin to notice how people react to the way that you're using your voice. Because the more you know about how to use your voice, the more power you have.